So I think for me, it's the idea that we live in a world of sound. And so I think a nice analogy of the relationship between biodiversity and bioacoustics is thinking of an orchestra where you have all of these different sounds coming from all over the room, and each of those sounds is corresponding to a different instrument section. And so whether you're in the jungle or whether you're on a coral reef, in many ways, these animal orchestras that fill ecosystems are the same sort of thing. And so, by communicating through sound or eavesdropping on these ecosystems, we can get an idea of who's there, what are they doing, what are they saying, how many are there. We can listen to predator-prey interactions. There's the description of, many of these sounds represent, sex and death in nature when they're used for courtship or feeding events. And so just by listening, we can understand all of these fundamental processes of biodiversity and nature just through this perspective of sound.
Sound is just one of the modality for us to sense the world. And I think in a way, the variety of sound that's out there, and if you want to kind of put it in broad buckets, it's like if you think about biophony, which is biological sound, which we're talking about here. But there's also, geophony, which is, a lot of the arts, geological process that creates us a sound of its own. And then the more increasingly anthropophony, which is our contribution in this acoustic space and the world. And all this coming together and creating a kind of a song of a place. And if you listen to it, you will hear that song. And, sometimes it could be composed by, crickets and earthquakes and traffic. Sometimes it could be something very, very different and very much centered around biodiversity or biological contributors. But as I said, it's one of the modalities. So when I think about biodiversity, it doesn't directly translate into acoustic biodiversity because not everybody's singing at the same time. So when you're listening in, you're getting a slice in the continuum of time to listen to the singers of that space and that time. And by then tuning into it, you kind of see what variety of singers are in there. Insects, animals, all different types of living organisms, right? And that, to me, is a representation of acoustic diversity, of what types of organisms are out there. And if you want to put a little bit of a value judgment in there, the diversity that potentially reflects the health of the space, so to speak. And that kind of goes into a little bit of the realm of conservation. But that's what I see as describing acoustic biodiversity.
What is the intrinsic value of biodiversity and the importance of biodiversity to the planet and how it functions and how it benefits us as humans, I think is a really fundamental concept that I think in light of, the Anthropocene and major biodiversity losses, I think the increasing public awareness of biodiversity is a good thing. Now, the fundamental question becomes, is it too little, too late? Or can we have and be able to catalyze a mass movement to prioritize the preservation of biodiversity to stem what may be the latest mass extinction event?
what I would add to it is that, oftentimes we want to find a focus in our experiences. Even for us, we are at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, right? So we find bird as the focal point for us to engage with conservation, science, public engagement, or whatever avenue you want to think about it. So we need to find a focus, and then when we understand that focal point, then we kind of radiate out from there. But I don't think that happens very naturally. It's when you're taken there and then given the experiences that, yeah, we can care about birds, but if you're not understanding what's going on in their context, are you really understanding birds? Are you really understanding their kind of life cycle, life history, or conservation? So that's taken from us as directly involved in science to somebody coming to a museum or a zoo or an exhibit space where they're kind of presented with a lot of different concepts and contexts, but they might find their focal point and move on with it. But until and unless you present it as a context that, oh, you might be seeing a cricket, but cricket lives in this context. It provides food for the birds, maybe, but it also is an architect at the ground level habitat of that space. So unless you connect that and show people the context, I think that's not very easily accessible to talk about biodiversity and having an intentional understanding of that. So I think for us as exhibitor, we need to do a little bit better job to take people through that process, because it is a lot of our work. We are kind of focusing on the ecosystem-based solutions rather than a species-based solution, because what we're seeing is that when you don't understand the ecosystem, when you don't understand the context, you cannot really make a big difference into the life and livelihood and the life cycle and life history of an organism. In a lot of ways, we talk about, our lab specializes at, understanding ecology and conservation at scale. So you can understand one organism, like, in a small bucket or in a small pond or a small garden. But if that species has a very broad range of how they function, where they feed, where they breed, and where they travel, and you don't understand the context, you kind of miss out a lot about the context of the species, and later on, the diversity that supports, or the ecosystem that supports that species to be successful.
for me, what is always exciting is when you start to find, universal is probably being too broad, but these really, widely distributed phenomena in nature that sort of highlights sort of the commonality of animals writ large, that, we're not, as humans, we're not nearly as unique or as special sometimes as we think we are, and so, with that in mind, in the context of vocalizations, the idea too that, for most vertebrates, sounds are produced either in reproductive contexts or in sort of aggression and agonistic contexts. And this is true all the way from fish all the way up to humans. And sure, there's some iterations on a theme, but those are the general contexts. So by listening to the sounds that are being produced, we can get an idea of what are these animals doing? What are they in the mood for? Are they defending a territory? Are they looking for mates? Are they having a throwdown with their neighbor? Are they looking for food? We can start to pick up on what's happening. I think what's also really exciting too is the number of organisms across the animal kingdom that are combining different aspects of gestures or movement and these vocalizations to help emphasize this message in what we refer to as a multimodal display. So you'll have fish that are doing, dips and sort of making these purring sounds on coral reefs. You'll have lyrebirds in Australia that are literally singing and dancing at the same time. So being able to start to see, how animals have multiple ways of trying to share their message, I think is really neat. And to see how that emerges again and again across the animal kingdom, I think, to the previous question, how do you think about biodiversity? It's like biodiversity is weird and it's wonderful. And it gets so exciting to see all of these different ways that animals use behavior and sound to solve different problems.
What I would also add to that is that, some of the organisms that we study, they have a very complex systems, complex life cycle, long, prolonged life cycle. And in many ways, our ability to study them is that's our limitation. You cannot study a, gray whale or a bowhead whale or a right whale in the detail and the context that is needed to understand that psychological connection between their vocalization and their being. So we are kind of limited also by our own imagination and abilities. And the second thing I would say is that in many ways, these organisms need to be understood beyond like the human framework of vocalization and emotions and communications. And I think when we kind of allow ourselves that creative space, that's when we will probably start to understand the species and what it means for them. So what I would say, we're kind of limited by our own imagination for what's going on in nature and kind of the communication channel of some of these species.
And to touch on the neuroscience component of it, what's exciting is that many vertebrates, starting with fishes all the way up the vertebrate tree of life, have specialized nuclei in the hindbrain dedicated to vocalization. Mm-hmm. And so we know how different areas of the forebrain and the midbrain are innervating the hindbrain, which then projects neurons, and in many cases highly specialized nerve cells, to go to dedicated anatomy specifically evolved to produce sound. So in a case of some of the fish that we study, my mentor and colleague Andy Bass on campus has shown that when you put an electrode in the brain, the part of the brain in the midbrain that will ultimately generate sounds is producing a spike pattern that corresponds one-to-one with the output coming from the hindbrain that's going to the muscles. You've measured the activity in the muscles, it's that same patterning that then corresponds exactly to those peaks in the sound itself. So we have this one-to-one correspondence between what's happening in the brain and the sound that these fish are emanating. And so what gets to be kind of exciting and a little bit mind-blowing is that, we have these hydrophones, we can listen to the rocky intertidal shores in California, and we can listen to a population of fish. But not only hearing those fish, knowing the relationship between the brain and the sounds, we're actually getting insight into what's happening into the individual brains of all of these fish along the coastline. And so we can go from brain cell all the way up to population level interactions, all through this medium of sound. There's many different aspects of empathy. I think, as a human, the idea of bioacoustic empathy is using sound to appreciate, either others or the world around us. I think we don't, to Ashik's point of not fully understanding what these animals do and how they work, and only having just scratching the surface despite, thousands of years of science. I don't think we know enough about the cognitive capabilities of most animals. And so I think, as there's a little bit of humility that we need to have as scientists to be able to say, okay, what do we understand and what don't we understand? And so, things like empathy, as a scientist, I'm most comfortable talking about sort of in the human domain and not overly projecting, what a fish or a whale might be thinking or feeling. But so I like the idea of bioacoustic empathy is the idea, for me, it's the idea of using sound to either appreciate others or appreciate the world around me and have some emotional insight into what's happening for me as the listener.
One thing that I would say is that, it comes almost in the space between empathy and maybe inspiration, is that oftentimes, like, you listen to sounds and you listen to different organisms, and you're really at awe of this orchestra of things that these animals are able to do. Like, bowhead whales, singing through under the ice and in the Arctic, and creating these complex songs and singing for many minutes at a time. This time of the year, we are going through some migration of warblers, and this tiny little warblers the size of your thumb creates these complex songs and projects it with all of his heart, or her heart, and to send a message, and for us to kind of first experience that and then get inspired to understand that. I think that creates that connection and kind of gets to that space of empathy, but that's more of a human experience to empathy towards the singers of the biological world. Within or interspecies, if that empathy exists in the acoustic space, that's a fascinating question, and I don't have answer or insight into that.
For me, as a fish biologist, when I tell people I study fish acoustic communication and fish singing at each other, I often get a lot of really weird looks where it's like, what, fish do that? People fully appreciate it for birds singing and whales singing, and other critters in nature. But I think when people, non-scientists start to find out that, all these animals are using sounds to communicate, I think that gives people a broader appreciation for what animals are capable of. And to not, I don't like to, for me personally, don't like to say that one animal is smarter than another. These are animals that evolved over hundreds of millions of years to do what they do. And the fact that they still exist means they're good enough at it. But I do think that when you start to share with people how this diversity of animals are using sounds to communicate, I do think it imparts significant appreciation on the part of the public to realize these are more than just a sack of cells existing in nature, that there's something more to it. It can, in some cases, be relatively sophisticated information encoded in sounds that are being transmitted between sender and receiver. And so the dynamics of a speaker, so to speak, or a singer and a listener, is this dyadic relationship that we see really at all levels of life.
Intelligence part, or kind of moving forward into their kind of the life trajectory by using sound and using their environment. We see many examples of how some of the species are kind of the masters of their own ecosystems and habitats and domains. A blue whale kind of almost uses the physics of the ocean to send a message that can travel hundreds of miles, if not more. And evolution and then adaptation to that evolutionary process and understanding what's going on, that's probably guiding them to be able to orchestrate that long-term, long-distance communication processes. Even, birds and other animals, they are using their habitats, even this type of canopy, or what level of the forest that they reside in, and what type of vocalization that they produce, and how far they project. All of those information is really, really intricate, and is in many ways very smartly designed. Another thing happens is, how the physical side of it and also acoustic communication side of it, they are trying to project information to the receiver that they want to receive, but also evading danger, So my mate can hear me, but the predator shouldn't. So creating this kind of these channels, and oftentimes there's the talk about acoustic niche, which is some species occupy a certain part of this time frequency domain of sound versus acoustic partitioning, and all these type of intricate things that more we look, the more we find, and they are masters of their environment, and they're using sound to drive some of the functions that Aaron mentioned to further their own well-being and their life cycle. Well-being may not maybe more anthropomorphized term, but success towards their species end goal. We see incredible examples of that all over. But more is needed to understand, because again, these are, especially from the acoustic point of view, it's a pretty quickly evolving science, and the more we look, the more new information that we find.
So I think one of the phenomena that you see both sociologically among humans as well as in some ecosystems is almost homogenization occurring at large scales. Like, so I have family from the deep south, and really strong southern drawl that you used to hear, that for me I hear and I immediately envision my grandparents sitting on the porch. And now you go down to a place like Georgia, so many of these mannerisms and way of speaking are disappearing as there's more and more mixing between different subpopulations. A lot of those nuances to speech and to ways of speaking are disappearing. I think in parallel with that is that with losses of biodiversity, these soundscapes that we listen to, that we grow to understand nature, are also changing. So think about with the loss of wolves in the Mountain West, the howls that you might hear at night are disappearing. That you have some of these acoustic mimics, things like I mentioned, like lyrebirds, that are able to repeat with astonishing clarity the sounds of other species around them. So what happens when those species go extinct? Do those aspects of their mimicry, do those disappear as well, or do they encapsulate soundscapes of eras gone by, and does it persist? I think what's so cool in thinking about this connection, this deeply rooted connection between song or speech and cultural history is, we see this in humpback whales, where song is culturally transmitted. We're still trying to figure out what exactly it means with these really complex and elaborate acoustic displays, but what we know is that somewhere in the Western Pacific, this structure of themes and notes emerges, and it basically propagates across the Central Pacific to the east and the Indian Ocean across to the west, and it's changing over time. These are learned songs that animals are doing, and they're adapting. And so we can see this process of cultural transmission occurring, in these great whales. And I think a really captivating question is, how widespread is the cultural transmission through speech or song across the animal kingdom? Certainly humans do it. The fact that whales are doing it is really provocative, and then I think it raises the question of where else is it occurring.
I grew up in the Indian subcontinent at one point, not too distant past. About 800 languages were spoken in the subcontinent alive, and that's disappearing very, very rapidly. And sometimes it was such a small enclave of places where this language are spoken, they're dying off. And as Aaron mentioned, is that the kind of increasing need for homogeneity, both through cultural processes and economic processes, to kind of influence people to act in a more kind of a standardized format. That's kind of taking away some of this richness that exists in the human dimension of it. So that's the concern, and I think that also translates into the cultural homogeneity as well, because language, food, and music and expression, those are kind of the attached to the language of the people, and the kind of the vernaculars or specificity of some of the construction of the languages. So I think that part is really a kind of a move towards homogeneity and losing some of this really richness that exists in the human cultures around the world. So going into the kind of the species domain, and this more talking about the conservation and biodiversity piece, is that, if we in an ideal world, if we understand songs and song creation and vocalization as a maybe simplify it as a pure function of some sort of reproductive performance. So if that evolves over time and occurs naturally, that there's a kind of a natural selection that's attached to it. The singer that has the most complex song, or song that has different elements that might be attractive, and that creates reproductive success down the line. What happened with our intervention into this natural world, we kind of broken into this natural processes. Let's say, by the end of the whaling era, there were some species that 50, 60 individuals left. So we kind of purged some of the cultural evolution from some of the species, and some of the, especially the learned behavior. If you take out those dominant singers, that would then transmit to the next generation. If that individual is taken out of the population, that social evolution stops right there. And when our activity, our impact influences that directly, you're losing that quote unquote cultural richness in both biological vocalizations and true standardization and in human cultures.
in many ways, I mentioned before, like this idea of like sort of central themes and variation on that theme. One of the things that we see across all animal vocalizations is sort of a trade-off. And it's a continuum, but on the two extremes, you can either have sounds that are what we call temporally patterned. These could be like, these could be beats. They could be sort of a staccato, where it's not frequency information that's relevant necessarily so much as the timing and the time interval and the duration of those sounds. So whether it's like a pop, 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 or these crickets or fish or whatever, even beatboxing to a certain extent. It's all about the rhythm. On the other extreme are these tonal and harmonic sounds. These are the melodies and the harmonies that you're hearing that are very tonally rich. And we can hear modulation with upsweeps and downsweeps and harmonic content that we can extract quite a bit of information. And then you have stuff in the middle too, so there are midpoints. But to see that so many animals are evolving sounds along this continuum, yet there is so much in common across vocal diversity, I think for me is always really exciting. So, in many ways, in our lab group here, we study pretty much all acoustically active critters and ecosystems around the planet. And at a certain point, we're using similar software to do this analysis. The computer doesn't care what the sound looks like. It doesn't care what animal's producing it. We are using similar techniques to understand what these animals are saying. And so at its core, we're looking at sound. And for us as the biologists, what we bring into it is an understanding of where do these sounds come from? What's the broader context in which they're produced? How do they fit into their ecosystem? And how can we understand how these organisms are surviving and thriving in the habitats in which they live?
this change and biodiversity. What we see sometimes, and I'll use an example of bowhead whales. We studied bowhead whales off the coast of Alaska, off of Point Barrow, and they do every 10 years they do a survey, and we've been collecting data from that region for many decades now. And what we started seeing is that as population was increasing, their song, the density of song and the complexity of song was changing as well. So I think there is that idea, if you want to see forward moving kind of evolution of this vocalization and how that moves through time and space in a place where these animals are provided a place and a space to kind of thrive and come back to its kind of the natural state before human intervention really reduced their numbers and their populations. You start seeing they're forming a more complex vocal communication channels or repertoire, so to speak. And maybe that's a signal of something of a reemergence of a culture, which I cannot scientifically prove, or I don't have evidence to prove it, but it has the tendencies of that. And I don't know whether that exists in other populations and other species. But you can also take the example of humpback whales. Their population has recovered in many parts of the world, and they're very enigmatic singers. And potentially more population creates the competition to be more innovative, and that probably drives the diversity of singers and the elements in their songs. But it can also go other way. It could go it could be that a very dominant song or pattern of vocalization is more successful, and everybody converge towards that. So it's not always linear, but if you're paying attention, you can see some of this kind of dynamics going on.
I think on the one hand, the idea of a sort of overarching concept of nature is really helpful, because I think what ends up happening is this idea, we understand and we care about what we're connected to. So we listen to people, let's say we're traveling overseas, and you hear somebody speaking a similar language, you immediately turn to them and be like, oh, I have something with them. Or people from the same place that meet somewhere else, and they realize, oh, you're from there, I'm from there too, and then and they're doing some degree of matching the way that they're speaking. So it's connection. So I think the idea of for humans being able to appreciate the diversity of the animal soundscapes and realize that we can hear what's happening with nature. We can understand it, is it healthy? Is it thriving? How many critters are represented? Just through what we're hearing, I think is inherently important. Being able to have this appreciation for nature is fundamental to the continuation of biodiversity. On the flip side, I think that the difficulty in having, or the one challenge of having a concept like Mother Nature, is that it implies some degree of invincibility or resilience, that there is an all overarching power that's going to get us through all of this, and we don't have to worry about our actions in terms of doing horrible things to the planet or to nature. And so the other, my fear is that, reliance on a concept like Mother Nature, she's not strong enough to save us all and to keep this planet going. We have some accountability in terms of the conservation and preservation of nature. It requires action upon us as well. So I think, if we view the concept of Mother Nature as bringing us all together and having or increasing an appreciation of biodiversity and creating connection between humans and nature, I think that's great. If we basically say, oh, Mother Nature's here and we get a pass, and I can continue to engage, I don't have to change my behaviors, the planet will be fine for another 100 years, I think that it would be concerning. So I think there's two ways to look at it. I like to be an optimist, so I would personally try to shift towards the former, of being able to really pursue connection and to make other people aware of that connection. And you know, we have a pretty miraculous planet. I'd like to keep it that way.
I think there's a little bit of an honesty that's needed for a very long time. And I don't know, maybe it's for our social construct. We have taken the approach that we need to save the nature. We need to save the world for some benevolent reason. I think there's a little bit of a lack of honesty in that. If we pack up and leave tomorrow, go to Mars or somewhere else, this planet will be pretty. It's going to be fine. There may be some ups and downs and changes, but it's going to be fine. It is, as a concept, it's going to exist. So then what are we talking about? We're talking about our mere survival and success as a species, using and utilizing the resource, I shouldn't say resources, the bounty of this space, this world, this earth. So that's the honest relationship. We are essentially an extractive force on this planet for the success and thriving of our own species. From that point of view, and you're honest about it, then you think, okay, so if this is the function that we are kind of trying to build and thrive on, then it behooves us to pay attention to what's being destroyed and what's being recreated and what's being lost. Because the continuation of some of those processes is directly linked to our mere survival. So if you're not paying attention to that, we're actually working against our own interest. So it's a mother nature in a way that, mother feeding an infant. We are that infant. Our whole survival depends on that mother's caring, paying attention, and keeping us through, all these challenges of survival. That relationship I understand. We saving this Mother Earth in one way or another, that relationship I don't understand as clearly. And I think when we move past that and have that honesty with ourselves, we probably can interact with what we need to do as a species more clearly. Our previous director at the lab, Dr. Fitzpatrick, and in one presentation he said, no matter who you are, whether you care for birds or not, that's besides the point. Just think that each bird is a sensor, and it's sensing its surrounding, its world, in all different places of the world. So you have these billions of sensors all around the world. So, and he was talking about bird as an organism, but then you take that and apply it to acoustics or bioacoustics. We're eavesdropping into the channels of communication of all these different species, and increasingly the technology and our data processing capacity is going to a place where we can really do that at a very large scale, if not at the global scale. We still may need to go a little bit farther to do that. But just imagine that we're eavesdropping into the channel. Then apply that to that sensing of the world and the biological world. And by sensing that, and if we could elevate that to this understanding, that could open up a area and a kind of a knowledge that could inspire or change, or kind of have it almost like a threshold shift in our understanding and knowledge. And that's the kind of space I want to imagine, that by paying attention, by understanding this hidden channel, like I'm hearing birds all day long. If I could understand, their life, livelihood, history, and, their kind of, the psychosocial kind of parts of those communication channels, I think it could open up a window to us that, again, could be a threshold shift for us. And that could be a place where we probably build more empathy towards that organism or the system. We apply better mechanism to create a coexistence between them and the human interests, and then potentially, in the future, kind of allow them the space to both thrive and have the cultural and vocal richness that their species and their organism offers. So that, in my opinion, is the kind of the imagination space that I can think of right now.
I love the way you brought up the idea of frame of reference, because when I think of putting words together like bioacoustic and imagination, on the one hand, I actually kind of find it both liberating but also really inspiring. So so much of biology as a science, or in this world that Sheik and I are in, of what we call sensory physiology, thinking about how animals sense the world around them. In many ways, it was constrained by a highly anthropocentric frame of reference. So the idea that you had anatomists in the 1800s say, well, when I go swimming, I can't smell underwater because water goes up my nose, but I can't smell anything. Fish can't smell. Whales can't smell. And it's like, you look at a fish, it's got nostrils. It has a really well-developed olfactory bulb in the brain. Like, of course it can smell. Just because a human can't do it doesn't mean, the fish can do it. I think, and it's the same thing with ultraviolet light. Humans have a fairly narrow visual wavelength spectrum that they can see. You've got birds and fish that are seeing in ultraviolet light. You've got reptiles that are sensing infrared. So the way that animals perceive themselves or perceive the world around them is so much broader than what humans can do. Even terms like ultrasonic or infrasonic are specifically centered around the frame of reference of the human frequency range that we can hear. And so the idea of saying, okay, when I think of something like bioacoustic imagination, I think of what are all the weird and wild and wonderful ways that animals are using sound that haven't even occurred to us yet. So how are they picking up on, centuries or millennia of evolutionary history through vocalizations? How are they picking up on context? How do they know where one animal is calling from or what the context is, and getting past what is, our view of animals being, in some ways just simple automatons of having a stereotyped sound that sounds like this and it's all the time, and these are relatively simplistic organisms, and instead saying, how might all of these things have evolved to greater understand the world around us? We think that acoustic communication has been around for hundreds of millions of years. It certainly predates the evolution of humans. So why should we define what animals can and cannot do only from the perspective of what humans can and cannot think about? And so, for me as a biologist, having devoted my life to this, it's all about the imagination and the inspiration of trying to understand, how do animals work? How can we understand them? And how can we use that knowledge to better improve the resilience and conservation of the planet?
Sometimes when we get deep into science, we don't allow ourselves to get into those spaces. But honestly, I can speak for many of us. Probably I shouldn't, but we come from a space of inspiration to the space of science. And in our previous conversation, I was talking about like art is a form of expressing and making science accessible in many ways. So I think we need to allow ourselves once in a while to get to that, connecting back to that inspiration space, because that gives our science so much more meaning in a way.